So, what happens when two IELTS teachers come together to have a conversation practicing IELTS speaking questions? Well, not only do you get some great Band 9 language, but you also get some amazing tips which I think will surprise you. Come and find out more. Hi, this is Keith from the Keith Speaking Academy, here to help you speak better English, give better answers, and get a higher score on the IELTS speaking test. So today, it's my great pleasure to be here today with Ho Kin Dat, also known as Dat, who is an IELTS teacher from Vietnam. And he has a very successful Facebook page. Some of you may know IELTS with Datio, as well as a YouTube channel, and he also gives classes in Vietnam. So we've come together to have a conversation about different IELTS topics. And basically, this is in effect an IELTS speaking mock test, right? But it's done like a conversation. So you'll notice every question I ask is an IELTS speaking question. But the way Datio answers and the feel of the test is very conversational. And this is really, really important, right? I've given thousands of tests, and the most successful IELTS speaking tests are the ones that feel like a conversation, where the student is able to speak in a natural way, like it's a conversation. This is very hard to do, but it's something I want you to notice as you're watching and listening to the conversation that we have today, right? So in effect, it's an IELTS speaking test, but without part 2, right? We decided not to do part 2 because it didn't feel a natural part of the conversation. I mean, can you imagine, right? If you're having coffee in Starbucks with your friend and you're talking about, what did you do at the weekend? And, oh, by the way, now I'd like you to talk about this topic. And you're like, what? What are you doing? And you've got 1 to 2 minutes. Why you stop? What are you doing? It's not a natural thing you'd do over coffee. So we missed out part 2, but we wanted to show you some great language, so Band 9 level language, and the way that you can do this through natural conversational English. So what you'll get in this video, you'll see 3 different topics. At the end of each topic, I will be picking out some of the great language that you can also learn to use. And then also, after we finish the conversation, we carry on talking about learning English, preparing for IELTS, and some really nice tips and ideas to help you do that. Okay, let's get started. Great. So, the first question I need to ask is, how do I pronounce your name?
Oh, you can call me Dat or Daddy-o. It sounds kind of funny.
Dat or Datio?
but just call me Dad. I think that's my real name. Daddy-o is more like a nickname that my friend gave me, but I think it's cute. That's why I chose that for my channel.
Right, fantastic. It's a great name. I like it, Datio. But I'll call you Dat. That's fine.
Keith,
yeah,
right?
Keith, that's right, exactly, with that strange th sound. So many people struggle with.
Yeah.
Keith, so I'm based here in Spain. Where do you live, Dat?
I'm currently living in Saigon, or people would call it Ho Chi Minh City, but I prefer Saigon because it's kind of reminiscent of the past,
Yeah, indeed. So is that your hometown, or is your hometown a different place?
It's my hometown actually. I was born and raised here, and I actually have been living here, my whole life. I know that I did move to Singapore to study for a few years, and then I came back here. But my life, it doesn't feel very different from before. So yeah, I'm living here currently.
Right. And what do you like about Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City?
Oh, I feel pretty fortunate to be living here because I got, I got access to pretty much any amenity that you can possibly think of, right? And it's very modern. It's very convenient to live here, and um, I'm a foodie as well. So,
Mm.
like I love eating. So I have a passion for eating, trying different cuisines. And Saigon, particularly Saigon, has, a variety of cuisines, and I can try as many kinds of food that I can think of.
Right. So you've been in that city since you were born. Has that city changed over the years?
Um, over the years, you mean over the last 10 years
Over the
or
last
something?
10 years, 15 years? Yep.
I didn't really, pay attention, but the most striking change is probably the fact that it has gotten more polluted and hotter, so much hotter than before. I think it's the same situation for a lot of mega cities
Mm.
that are growing. But Saigon definitely has a lot more residential, areas, apartment complexes and skyscrapers. So I think that's it's kind of a nice thing to have, but at the same time, the infrastructure cannot really, accommodate that many people. And I
Right.
think it's a good and bad thing. And also, it's getting more polluted over time um, because of the volume of traffic on the road as well. So I really hope that in the future something should be done about the congestion issue over here. So that would definitely help with the air pollution problem as well.
Right. Very interesting. Great. So let's have a look at some of the great Band 9 language that Dat is using here to talk about hometown. First of all, I noticed he said it's reminiscent of the past. That's lovely. Reminiscent, lovely word. Reminiscent of means reminds me of the past. Great. I was born and raised here. Now, we could also say I was born and raised, I was born and bred here, meaning I was born and grew up here. So, nice language. This is a binomial, born and bred, born and raised. Lovely language. Next, we've got a great example of what I see as kind of building blocks to make more complex sentences, right? So Datio says, I've got access to pretty much any amenity you could think of. Look at the blocks here, right? Now, a simple lower level student may say, I've got access to all amenities, right? The amenities are the facilities that you may get in a city, right? Maybe the library, the shops, the shopping mall, the gymnasium, all of these amenities, right? So I've got access to all amenities. Then you could add pretty much. I've got access to pretty much all amenities. And then you can add another block. I've got access to pretty much any amenity you could think of, right? Can you see the building blocks are making more complex sentences? It doesn't have to be strange, unusual tenses. This is also very, very nice language. Moving on, he uses the word foodie. Nice, informal English, very good. I'm a foodie, a person who loves eating, loves food. And notice this sentence, right? The infrastructure cannot accommodate that many people. So, again, nice language. The infrastructure refers to the roads, the bridges, the buildings. So, the infrastructure of the city cannot accommodate that many people. Here, meaning that the roads are on and the space is not enough for that many people, right? It can't accommodate. This restaurant can't accommodate 100 people. There's not enough space. Really nice language. Overall, I notice he's using, a wide range of vocabulary very flexibly, right? We're talking about hometown. He talks about infrastructure, mega cities, residential areas, skyscrapers, amenities, right? Clearly, huge flexibility to talk about this topic. Also, notice any pauses are not for vocabulary. Any pause that he makes is actually just for the idea. And again, this is natural band 9 speaking. You can pause just to think of an idea. That is absolutely fine. And finally, let me just address this question, because a lot of people say, when we are asked about hometown, is that the place where we live or the place where we were born, right? The short answer is your hometown is where you were born, right? But also, it doesn't matter that much, right? The examiner first doesn't know if it's true or not, and secondly, doesn't care. The point is, we're talking about a town and a place where you have some experiences. So don't get too anxious or worried about, oh, which city should I talk about, right? Yes, it should be the place where you were born. But if you want to talk about the place where you live now, then you could as well. It doesn't matter that much, right? As they say, don't sweat the small stuff. Let's carry on with the next topic. Now, what about you and your weekends? So what do you do at the weekends?
Well, uh, I don't know if people know this fact about me, but I'm self-employed. I don't work for other people, so I don't have really clear boundaries between like a weekday and a weekend. But I try my best to schedule some downtime on the weekend to hang out with friends, catch up with them, grab a coffee together because I love coffee. So yeah, I of course we all need to relax sometime, right? So
Right.
that's what I tend to do on the weekends. But if works calls for it, I sometimes I would have to spend the whole weekend just working on my deadlines. So yeah.
Right. So what about last weekend? What did you do last weekend?
Let me try to remember.
Hmm.
Well, it was like just a typical, it was just a typical weekend like any other weekend. So I think I started my day with how do I say this? So I started my day by finishing some of the tasks that on my to-do list, and then I just grabbed a coffee with my best friend, and just took it easy, spent some quality time with him. So
Right.
that's what I did, I think.
What about most people in your hometown? I mean, how do they spend the weekends typically?
Oh, people in my hometown, like people in Saigon.
Hmm.
As far as I know, I think Vietnamese people are really big on, spending time at cafes and drinking coffee in the morning, especially on Saturdays and Sundays, with either their family or friends, and I'm no exception. What else do they do? Well, a lot of youngsters and even older generations, they hang out at the mall as well, um, because Vietnam, Saigon in particular is so warm, so people tend to seek refuge in those malls that are air conditioned,
Yeah.
and do a bit of window shopping or drink tea, coffee, or have lunch in those malls. I think
Nice.
that's a lot of people. That's what a lot of people do here in
Right.
Vietnam. Yeah.
Nice. And have you got any plans for next weekend?
Um, Next weekend, I don't know if it's going to be very different from this weekend, but most likely I'm going to be doing the same stuff I do this week. But considering the fact that I'm kind of up to my neck at the moment in deadlines, I think I'm going to spend my next weekend working on my deadlines before I can think of taking any time off.
Right. You're a busy man. Gosh.
I try
Um,
to keep busy. Yeah.
Brilliant. So let's have a look at some of the language and also some of the tactics that is using. In fact, let's begin with some of these tactics, right? So he does sometimes self-correction, and that's really good, right? If you make a mistake and you realize, just correct yourself straight away. And he makes a very, this is a native speaker kind of mistake. He says, I need to schedule some downtime, right? Just mispronounce the word, downtown and downtime. Perfectly natural, but instantly just corrects himself as he goes, as a native speaker would do. The other thing he does is he creates some thinking time, right? I think when I asked him about last weekend, he said, oh, let me try to remember. Let me try to remember. Giving himself some time to think. Brilliant. Good tactic. Also, similarly, he asks himself the question, right? Like you're thinking, what else do they do? Oh, yes. Right? So you're almost asking yourself the question. Native speakers do it. Absolutely great. Good tactics to gain time to think. IELTS, you really need to get, you need time to think of ideas. Everybody does. So these are ways to do it. What about the language? Well, some very, very nice, I would say that is a band 9 speaker. Some great language here. He has this informal language, often with phrasal verbs, right? Hang out with friends, right? Spend time with friends. Catch up with them, right? To get up to date with what they're doing. Some idiomatic expressions I noticed. If work calls for it. So if it's necessary for work, right? If work calls for it, then I'll stay late. I'll work longer, right? If it's necessary for work. If work calls for it, lovely. Up to my neck in deadlines. I'm up to my neck in deadlines. I have too many deadlines. I'm up to my neck in work. I'm up to my neck in bills to pay, maybe, right? Very, very nice idiomatic expression. Now, another key thing I want to point out is in part 1 in the test, there is very often, right, quick changes in tense. So quick changes from the present tense to the past to the future. And this is deliberate to see if you can use different tenses flexibly and quickly, right? So we started in the present, talking about present habit, and things that Dat said were they seek refuge in those malls. They seek refuge, which is nice language, right? That means that they look for shelter from the heat because it's so hot in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City. It's so hot that they look for shelter in the air-conditioned shopping malls. But the key thing is it's the present tense, right? They seek refuge in those malls. They do a bit of window shopping. Lovely language, right? Window shopping where you don't actually spend money, but they do a bit of window shopping. So clear, simple, present tense. But then notice the switch. When I talk about last weekend, he thinks, but then he says, oh, I grabbed a coffee. I took it easy. Switches fluently into past tenses with nice connection as well. Grabbed a coffee, right? Take a coffee or took a coffee. Took it easy. Took it easy. Took it easy. Well, Dat has a more American accent, right? Took it easy. But the connection is the same with both of those. And then when we switch to the future, right? What will you do? He uses going to with the present continuous tense, right? Most likely I'm going to be doing the same stuff. Brilliant. And what's more, he makes the contraction of going to gonna, right? I'm going to be doing the same stuff. Fantastic. Very flexible use of different tenses. And that is a key thing to look out for in part 1. I'm interested in Vietnam and the clothes in Vietnam because I think you have some quite interesting clothes in your country because I've been to Vietnam. Tell me a bit about the kind of clothes people wear there.
Um, do we wear in Vietnam? It depends on what occasion we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know if I have a translation for all the traditional costumes that we wear,
Right.
but normally when we go out on a normal day, probably I see people wear jeans, t-shirts, shirts, just the usual that you would
Right.
see on the street.
So
Um,
when do people wear the traditional kind of clothes?
oh, like áo dài. I think you've
Mm.
heard of this term,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When okay, one situation I can think of is when like female students they have to put on áo dài during the first day of during Monday on each Monday of the week.
Mm.
So I think because they have to, it's sort of the rule, the regulation in a lot of the schools in Vietnam for females to put on áo dài. But it's sort of unfair because like the guys, the male students, they wear the same uniform,
Right.
right? And I have no idea why. And I see people wear áo dài when they during Tet or some bigger festivals in Vietnam
Right.
because that's time for them to take photos and just show off on social media. So looking traditional, I think attracts a lot of attention. Yeah.
Right. And do you
Yeah.
think it's a good idea to have a obligatory school uniform for school children?
Oh, school children. I suppose that would be a good idea because you would need to be able to identify who is a student at your school.
Mm.
So I think having like requiring students to wear uniform would do the trick. And also for to create a sense of community, if you're wearing uniform, you feel a sense of belonging to that community. And especially if you come from a really prestigious school, you would want to feel like you belong there and you would want to show that to the whole world. So I think wearing uniform, it has a few advantages.
Right. What about adults? I mean, how do you feel about adults wearing uniform in the workplace? Should adults be forced to wear uniforms in the workplace?
Um, this is kind of interesting, but I feel like it shouldn't be made mandatory
Hmm.
because, for example, if we're talking about front desk workers like a bank teller,
Hmm.
right? If you're serving customers, you have to meet with customers on a daily basis, then sure. I think wearing uniform is advisable because you would want to project this air of professionalism to clients in order to build trust with them, right? So wearing uniform for those staff is kind of essential and expected. But if you're working in the back office, you're in charge of just the business operations side. I think your productivity doesn't really depend on looking professional. So I don't think that should um, those staff should be made to wear uniform because I don't think it serves any function.
Right, right. Good point. Do you agree with this idea that you can judge a person by the clothes that they wear?
People usually say don't judge a book by its cover, and I think there's some validity to it, but it's not always accurate because in society we tend to judge people quickly by the clothes that they put on, and I feel like it depends on the profession as well. For example, uh, if you're a salesperson, you need to kind of make a good impression with your client because there's no other cues for them to judge you whether you are successful, whether you are trustworthy. So looking presentable and professional and smart is essential in this case, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you are successful or you have you earn a very lucrative income by looking smart and looking dressed in a blazer. It doesn't equate with that, right? But for
Yeah.
other mega rich people like Mark Zuckerberg, he's always dressed in like simple and plain clothes, and he's one of the, the most affluent individuals on earth. So I think that it's not an accurate metric. Clothes are not an accurate metric to measure a person's worth.
Yeah. Very interesting. That's great. Very good conversation about clothes. Brilliant. I'll stop kind of the intense questioning there.
Oh, thank you.
So in part 3, we looked at the topic of clothes, right? So first of all, again, I think a very good tactic and a very good tip for part 3 is to give lots of examples. And Dat does this really well. Examples help you develop your answer, be more specific, and so bring out a wider range of vocabulary, right? For example, when we were talking about judging people by their clothes, Dat says, well, for example, if you're a salesperson, and then he goes on to elaborate. Or the opposite, he says, if a lot of mega rich people like Mark Zuckerberg, they dress in very simple clothes. So he's giving lots of examples to develop his answer. Really important in part 3. Vocabulary, again, I mean, at band 9, you're using a very wide range of vocabulary, great sense of collocation and style to express precise meaning. And Dat does this. I mean, have a look at some of the things he said. Requiring students to wear a uniform would do the trick. Lovely expression, right? Meaning that would work well, right? It would do the trick. It does the trick. It works well. To do that. Make a good impression, good collocation. A prestigious school, prestigious meaning a reputable or esteemed, having a good reputation. Project an air of professionalism, right? To look like you are professional. Looking presentable, that well dressed, well groomed, looking presentable. Have a lucrative income, right? So being well paid or profitable, and not an accurate metric. Good collocation, accurate metric. Metric being when you measure something, it's the standard by which you measure it. So a metric of being wealthy, maybe your car, if you have a house, maybe the clothes you wear, these are all different metrics. So the language, the vocabulary is great. I think there's idiomatic expressions, there are collocations and precise meaning. Also notice the phrasal verbs again, right? To show off on social media. Phrasal verbs are very natural spoken English. Getting the right ones, especially with 2 prepositions, to show off on social media, really difficult, but done really well. Overall, fluency is great, right? I mean, there's fluency over long sentences, and the ability to develop topics, as I mentioned with examples, linking sentence after sentence, the cohesion and coherence is really solid. Very, very nice. I'll just mention a couple of other things which I think are worth talking about. One of them is the translation of your local language. So talking about clothes, Dat wanted to use a local word, right? A Vietnamese word. And he said, I don't know if I have a translation for the typical costumes we wear. And then he went on to use the word, right? That is absolutely fine. You can use 1 or 2 words in your own language if there isn't a translation. There probably isn't a ready translation. Just make sure you're making the meaning clear and it's absolutely fine, right? So in this case, I thought that was perfect, a perfect opportunity. Often clothes, food, drink, plants, trees, titles of films and books, we don't have a translation in English. So just say it in your own language and just make it clear what it is you're saying. Another interesting feature of natural spoken conversation for native speakers is what we call a restart. Is where you're saying a sentence and in the middle you kind of stop and then you change and then express it in a different way. It's absolutely fine to do this, right? That his example was, I see people wear this during TEV or some big festival. So he was probably going to say, I see people wear this when the TEV festival happens. But then he changes to say, I see people wear this during TEV, which is the New Year festival. And that is natural, native-like speaker. You can do this. It's absolutely fine. You want to avoid the hesitation, the right? Not that, but just changing mid-sentence is absolutely fine. Lovely. Well done, Dat. For me, without a doubt, he's speaking Band 9 level English, but also clearly he's understanding of how the test works and some really good tactics and tips that you can also follow. Let's move on. So I hope you can see from that conversation, right, the importance of natural conversational spoken English in the test, and the importance of relaxing in the test, because this allows you to get into the flow and be much more natural. You're going to go on now to watch the next part of our conversation. First of all, Dat talks about his feelings about the test or the conversation, and those aspects of natural English, as well as we discuss the balance of formality and informality in the test, right? It's a good question, right? How formal should you be in the IELTS speaking test? Let's have a look. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, how did it feel for you? Did you feel under pressure, or did you feel kind of relaxed?
Well, when you frame it in as a conversation, it feels a lot easier for me to to perform. Actually, like I was really a lot more relaxed, and I expressed more emotion, and just my intonation, it varied a lot more than when I took the test the last time. And I was in an exam mode, and then I was like very strategic about it, and it just didn't feel natural.
Yeah.
So this time,
that's interesting, because I try and speak quite a bit to students about being natural when they speak, for that very reason, because A, you get into the flow, but B, you have better intonation. You know, I see so many students who go into exam mode, and as soon as the question comes, it's I live in, and it becomes like a robot, because they get so tense, and it doesn't help you, because your intonation and your pronunciation falls because of that.
I have a question for you, because some examiners are really against informality in an IELTS speaking exam. So I'm not sure if my style, because I received a comment before saying that I sounded a bit too chummy in an exam, and I should be more formal.
Right, that's interesting. I think to an extent that's true, that the students need to be aware of a sense of formality. So maybe the idea of chatting to a friend over coffee is not quite right, but I mean, chatting to maybe a work colleague over coffee, I think having the natural English, but without, so not using slang, so not saying, hey dude, nice to see you, mate, how are you? You know, you don't be using slang words like mate and dude, because they're not your mate. They're a professional in their field, and you're in an interview with them. So I think there's a certain level of formality, but I think it's more reflected in the language. So you're not over familiar with them. You know, I wouldn't pay compliments and say, "Oh, it's a nice jacket you're wearing." Where, you know, it's a fine balance. I really think it is a balance. But I agree with you to a large extent. In this next part of our conversation, Dat and I go on to discuss some tips for preparing for IELTS speaking and looking at what's really important, right? What you really should be focusing on as you prepare for IELTS speaking. In addition, Dat asks me some questions about my experience of learning a second language, and I talk about in particular my experience with Chinese and taking exams as well for different languages that I've learned. Let's listen in and find out more. I mean, what about you with you personally? I mean, learning English and preparing for IELTS. What's your approach and strategy?
It's more of like in Vietnamese, we have the saying bathe in the language. I don't know if that's the same in English. So
Like immerse yourself in the language.
yeah, immerse yourself. So I didn't really sit down and cram, um, English, study from a book or, whatever. I tend to watch TV shows, a lot of shows, and just pick up all the natural expressions and the mannerisms and the way that you carry yourself when you say certain expressions and the kind of emotion that you have to express. So all of that, I think I picked up from movies and shows. But then you need a lot of time to be exposed to that kind of material. But for students, a lot of the times they don't have that kind of luxury, right? So they need to get certain score over the course of 3 months or even a month. So it's impossible. So I think that's what they lack. But in order to be an effective user of a language, I think putting in years of exposure would probably create the best result. You need to get a perfect score for listening and reading, and in order to do that, being good at it is not enough, right? You need to know the strategy. So it's more a matter of like familiarizing yourself with the tests and just being really strategic when you do certain parts of the test. Like in writing, you need to follow a particular format, and in speaking, you need to know what the examiner is looking for. And I'm getting myself more aware, like forcing myself to be more aware of those criteria.
Right.
That's how I pushed it to 8.5.
Right. Interesting. So for you, that the most important bit was the foundation of the language, having a really good, strong foundation in the language that you got through, as you say, bathing yourself in English. And then the kind of the knowing the exam and the tips is almost like the cherries on the cake. It's kind of the less important bit, but still important to know how to do the exam right.
I'm just curious, like, are you learning any second language at the moment? And do you have the same experience as I did?
So at the moment, I'm not actively learning second languages, but I do speak second languages. So I speak French, Spanish, and Chinese as well as English. And I think with all of those languages, I've been through tests. So I've had exam experience. I mean, when I did learning Chinese, which was my latest language, because I lived in China, I did the HSK, which is the Chinese.
Did you get a HSK 6?
Oh no, I got an HSK. I got level 3, which is kind of the pre-intermediate, almost intermediate level. But I had to prepare a lot. But I spent a lot of time, years learning Chinese, and then like for a month, I prepared for the test, getting used to the how the test works and what are the techniques for the test, and that helped a lot. It was really important. But I mean, my teacher was very realistic. She said, "You're going to get HSK 3. If you want a 4, you've got to put in another year of study and getting your language level up because your level's not high enough," which was great. I thought, okay, that's clear. I know that. So, and I did the HSK 3, and then I kind of stopped studying because life took over. I was busy at work. There was so much going on in my life. I'd had a new baby, and it was just, I didn't have time to study Chinese. So I kind of accepted that I'll be at that intermediate level, and that's the position I'm in, and I'm still there. Even though I still speak Chinese, I still practice Chinese. I haven't got any better. Like in the last 8 years, I've been at the same level for a long time. Oh, so true. How challenging it is to learn a second language, especially as an adult and once you start working. But it's beautiful, it's great fun, and it just opens up your world, right? When you can speak other languages. So great. I hope today that you've not only seen some great band 9 language, but that you've also learned the importance of being natural in the test, as well as also being a little bit strategic as well. I'd like to say a big thank you to Dat for joining me today. It's been fantastic, great fun. Do go and check out his Facebook page and his YouTube channel. He teaches not only speaking like me, but also reading, writing, and listening. So you can get some great tips over there. If you are in Vietnam, then also check out the link below because he teaches in Vietnam as well, which might be interesting for you. Thank you very much, Dat. And thank you to all of you for spending this time with us and listening today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.